What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Ask E Everything. I hope, as always, that this message finds you well and enjoying your day to the best of your abilities, considering all the craziness that's going on. It's an important note to take some time. I know there's a lot of serious stuff going on right now, and that there has been, but it's super important to take some time and kind of get away from that for a little bit. So even if you're really involved in it deeply and passionately, make sure you put aside a little time for yourself. And as always, I recommend getting some vitamin D. I think it's clutch. So if you got the sun out where you are, just get outside for 10-15 minutes. Look up at the sun, close your eyes, let it beat down on you, and just feel that for just a couple minutes. If you can kind of clear your mind and just concentrate on the warmth of the sun, works really well for me to just get me a little bit more recentered. Thanks for tuning in. If you are coming back as a repeat viewer, really appreciate your views. Really appreciate, honestly, the support. And if you've subscribed or if you've liked, really appreciate that as well. If you are new to the channel or new to the videos and you do enjoy the content, please give me a like and hop on the subscriber list here so we can get that bumped up a little bit. We've got an awesome question today. This question is really kind of almost, a question that is one of the, I would say, almost essential questions of this channel. And it involves the question of asking why. And so you'll see in the title that the formal question for the discussion today is, why is it so important to ask the question why right now? And then the secondary part of that is why it's so important to also encourage others to do that instead of discouraging it. So how did this come about? Quick little backstory. I started a new book yesterday afternoon, and it's one that I've been pretty excited to get into. And as I was reading the introduction, there was a kind of an explanation or a layout of what was going to be explored in the book. And at the end of the introduction, just prior to the first chapter, there was kind of this, almost like a playful disclaimer of sorts that basically said to the reader, there's no doubt that the kind of theories in this book regarding the science that was involved are somewhat controversial, and while a lot of folks just kind of turn their nose to it, turn their head to it, and don't consider it at all, there are plenty of great minds that over the years have considered this material very seriously and are continuing to look into it. It basically was, letting you know after that if you were kind of just, buttoned down to your view on the subject matter, which in this case was involving quantum mechanics, if you were kind of set in stone on your thoughts on that particular science and not, interested in having an open mind about it, or kind of looking into another possibility to explain a lot of the things that quantum mechanics can explain, that you should basically just put the book down and stop reading any further. It's kind of not the book for you. But if you were open-minded and curious to explore some areas that a lot of other traditional scientific methods have failed to explain, then basically read on, sit back, relax, and kind of enjoy the ride. This, really, first of all, really excited me to read the book, and I haven't read past that, so I'll update as I go, but it got me really stoked to read the book because it kind of, woke up that fire in me that is kind of right in line with a lot of the things that we discuss on this channel. One of the most important things being, to have an open mind and to, consider things outside the box and to, at times, even challenge the factual norms and the factual accounts of things that we are taught to believe, or that we are encouraged to believe. And it got me thinking a little further about just that inquisitive mind in general, and how so many people, myself included in certain areas in life, over time end up becoming so just kind of inundated with just factual information, what I would deem the what of the scenario. There's just kind of like the what's. So, things that are just, given to you, handed to you as factual information, and then you just kind of file them and store that information, and then you start to base your life around that knowledge that you have. And, so I was thinking of this as the what's versus the whys, and I was thinking of how the what is kind of an important subject to be always considering, However, it's also very boring and kind of, straightforward, and it's also just the definition of narrow-minded, right? To just take things for, how they're delivered to you and not question them or not want to understand more about them. And so then I started to think, well, why does this happen? And the question I kept asking myself is, why have we stopped, or why have we kind of, discouraged ourselves from asking why? And I started to think, first of all, well, this is because it's the age of technology, and it's the age of information, right? It's the information age where all the information, for the most part, or at least that's what they sell you, as being the case, all the information you could ever want is available basically in a moment's notice and at your fingertips at all times. And so in that age where we just consume all this information and basically are just looking up things on the internet or looking things up on social media or just, what have you, and instead of just saying, or instead of just taking this information in and, just filing it and moving on, why is it that we don't stop more often and say, well, why is this the case? Why is this happening? Why is someone doing this? Why do we have this problem? Whatever. And it really depends on the subject matter. But I started to think kind of further back and go backwards and backwards and backwards, which is just kind of the way my thought process goes. And I went all the way back to childhood, and I started to think of kind of the great wanderers, of the world are small children. As soon as they get a capacity for asking the question why, it becomes part of this amazing, thirst and hunger for answers. And not just the answers to what is the answer to this, but the next question is always, well, why? And so there's that, kind of situation that takes place between parent and child, which is often kind of made fun of and laughed about. But in reality, I think it's kind of a serious, situation where, the child continues to ask, but why, mommy, or why, daddy? And they give a more detailed answer to the question, and the child still wants to know, but why? And why? And it ends up being one of these things that literally could go on infinitely. The only problem is at some point, typically in that conversation, some frustration develops, and it's either the parent or the mentor, whoever really is speaking to the child, is either kind of fed up with the exploration on their end, either because they cannot really provide a more detailed answer or a more in-depth answer, or because they're just, plain, annoyed by the inquiries and just kind of the, repetitive nature of them. And so they end up kind of shutting that conversation down. And while I'm not a parent myself, I've seen this, many times over, with folks that are dealing with young children. Whether they're teachers or counselors or parents, aunts, uncles, older siblings or what have you. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that every time a child is asking why and would ask why for 10 hours if you let them, that process should be allowed to play out. I understand that it's not always practical to do that. However, I do believe that it's often cut too short. And for whatever reason that is. And so then the extension becomes, you've got this great, young mind which is inquisitive and wants to know the answer to why. Why is this happening? Well, why is it that way? It's almost as if the short answer or just the factual what answer is not good enough to them. And, the inclination is to make it good enough for them, to just provide the one answer that's going to basically get them to stop asking, why. But when you think about that process is kind of failed from the start for me, because why should we ever be, stopping or preventing someone from being more curious or from furthering their curiosity into a topic? And again, I get it for the sake of time that you can't do this every single time. But I started to think about myself and just being young and having that kind of inquisitive mind. And, remembering times where it would just be the case. And sometimes that, penultimate answer would be, because that's just the way it is, or because, I said so, right? And as a child, respecting, authority, you oftentimes just bow back out of it and say, okay, then I guess that's that. I can't ask about that anymore. And then you're suppressed, and you really never, well, I shouldn't say never, but a lot of those topics you'll never think to explore that way ever again because you've been told that that's just the way it is or what have you. And as you get older and you develop further, you get into a formal education. And depending on who you are, and of course there will be exceptions to this, but for the most part, you get put into school, and then you start to go learn this set of kind of factual, formal teachings. And again, a lot of that is great stuff to build up the foundation for, kind of a fruitful intellectual, experience. But when you think about it, everything in the textbook is just a what. It's a what, and I remember, in classrooms under different, topics, there'd be some time where it was spent on this is why this happened. But for the most part, you go to school, and whether it's kindergarten up to, the time you graduate high school, you're basically tested and kind of gauged on, everything that you're basically, analyzed on is about how much you know, right? And with few exceptions like creative writing and what have you, a lot of the things that are math, science, history based are just about read this information, retain it for some short period of time so you can, pass a test, and then move on. And for the most part, most of us will forget, the majority of that information, mostly because it's not very interesting. And, even if you do have the capacity to store a bunch of data that's factual, that answers the question, what happened, at the end of the day, you're going to so rarely recall that, unless you're playing Jeopardy or doing some kind of trivia game, that it's going to basically just be, wasting your brain space. What happens in that case is that as you get older, you go, I feel like, from this young inquisitor to this, person who, starts to just accept as you go through further education that, most of what you need to, quote, learn in life is just going to be factual. It's just going to be what happened, And as you take that further, and even over time, depending on what age, or when you were born and when you grew up, take it to modern times, and regardless of what age you are, we're in this age of just face value information. We have the 24-hour news cycle, ramming the same stuff down our throats every day. And then we've got the age of social media, which is so one-dimensional for the most part, right? It's clicking on things, swiping through things, getting instant gratification, a series of pictures or what have you. It's just like, what is this person doing? Okay, now I've seen what they're doing, move on. And this is just the way that we're built right now, is just to go be on to the next thing, move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. And, while this is interesting in the sense that your, experience in the course of a day today can be much more broad than your experience socially 20 years ago or 40 years ago, the question here is how substantive, how much substance is involved in all this exploration. Are we sitting there just looking at what is going on in the world, or what people are doing, and have we forgotten to ask kind of the why is it going on, or why is it happening? For me, this got me a little, concerned, because I started to even look at some of the complex issues that we're dealing with right now, and I started to think there's a lot of information being exchanged, there's a lot of opinions and attitudes and kind of passion and emotion involved in kind of just the, well, what's happening right now, and then, well, here's what we need to do to react to that. But I wonder if it makes more sense for folks to take, again, one step back and just start to think about, why is this taking place, and how is another great question. How did we get here? Why, are we in the situation that we're in? Not just what is the situation, and let me just, go react to that, and possibly put the same energy into it as is being, sent in my direction, which, often cases just going to kind of cross each other out and not really get us anywhere. So I guess the answer to the question for today is, why is it so important to ask why? To me personally, it's going to always be important. And it's not just right now, but it will really be effective right now, but it's always. I think that we just need to get back to a space where we enjoy being inquisitive about things. And we need to think to ourselves maybe a little bit about that path that I spoke about a little earlier. And maybe you have a different one. Maybe you can relate to it. Either way, I'm sure there's some sense of it that would kind of resonate with you. where you remember a time where you might have been much more curious about things in general than possibly you're letting yourself be right now. And if that's by choice, if you by choice have made yourself a more narrow-minded, kind of streamlined thinker, and that approach is something that works for you and just keeps you more at bay and is something you're more comfortable with, that's perfectly fine. But again, if you're watching these videos on this channel, I think there's probably a fair chance that you're interested in thinking about it in a little more unique of a way. And so the best way that you can start doing that is by asking why to things. And it could be the simplest thing that you're just so used to taking at face value. It could be the weather forecast. I mean, something that simple, you know, that you just kind of tune into to get the information and then you turn it off. But if you're like me, you know, 2 days ago, for example, when you watch the weather and we're told it's going to be a beautiful day tomorrow and mostly sunny with just a couple clouds, and then you wake up the next day and it's purely cloudy, and you wait the entire day for the clouds to clear so you can get some sun, but it never happens, and you go to bed and it's the same as cloudiness as when you woke up, it's important to ask, why did that happen? You know, what happened to the weather? Why was that forecast wrong? You know, and again, that's if you're interested in meteorology. If you want to pick something more complex, then obviously it will become more interesting. But what I'm saying, and kind of my challenge to you, is to really pick anything you want that you, for some period of time, have just taken at face value without really thinking further about it. And you don't have to be a meteorologist to wonder why the weather forecast was wrong. You don't have to be a social activist to wonder why we're experiencing the social injustice that we're experiencing, and to wonder why we're still dealing with this in 2020, and then to, you know, let that lead you to the history of it, and to, you know, why we're you know, we are where we are. You don't have to be, you know, an expert in quantum mechanics or physics or, you know, astrology or astronomy, for that matter, to, you know, wonder why we look at the universe the way that we do. You can just be curious about something. And the more curious you are about things, the more true answers, at least true for yourself, answers that you're going to be able to gather. Instead of just taking the information that's given to us and reacting based on that. News is mostly bullshit. There's some facts in it, but every news outlet has an agenda. Every, you know, news outlet has a political agenda, an angle, all this kind of stuff. It's very simple to just watch the news and go, oh, this is just what's happening. Okay, well, that's the day then. I guess that's the life we're living. But it's much more interesting to find out things for yourself, to look deeper into things, to explore them, to wonder about them, and to ask why. Why is he saying this? Why is the government acting this way? Why are people so upset about this but nothing's happening? And the more you dig, the deeper you'll get, and the more you'll be in a position to say, okay, now I see what's going on here. Here's how we can change it. You know, here's how I can approach that. Or if it's not something that I can change, here's how I can be a little more comfortable